Coming up today on the Nick Craig Show, the incredibly biased media in North Carolina is now crying foul that they are being held accountable for the ridiculous reporting on a variety of issues. We'll get into all the details with AP Dillon from the North State Journal coming up. And a good Tuesday morning to you. Welcome into the Nick Craig Show, streaming live this morning on YouTube, Rumble, X, and Facebook. Don't forget that you can take the program with you 24/7 on demand. It is totally free and real easy to do. Just head on over to your favorite podcast app, search for the Nick Craig Show, tap the subscribe or follow button, and take a new program with you each and every weekday morning. You can also listen online by visiting the website nickcraig.com. Our program this morning brought to you by Melissa Gott and the team over at the Law Group here in Wilmington. For any legal questions or challenges, lawgroupnc.com. We'll hear more from them coming up as we go through this very busy Tuesday edition of the Nick Craig Show. Media bias. This is nothing new. It's not a brand new conversation. This is something that has been discussed in great detail in a variety of different forms and fashions over the last couple of decades, so nothing necessarily brand new here. However, what is new is a kind of a series of interesting situations recently playing out in the state of North Carolina, where some reporters who have previously acted like fools, and I say that very clearly, have been barred access to campaign events that have been taking place from U.S. Senate candidate Michael Whatley. These left-wing media outlets, these incredibly biased reporters and reporting has been barred entry to events. And so this is a situation where in a perfect world, I would say that, this is not a good thing, that it's not great that individuals are being barred entry. But the reality is we don't live in a perfect world. And I'm a big fan of the word accountability, that you are held accountable for the things that you say and the things that you do. And the reality here in North Carolina is that we have got so many people that pretend to be journalists here in the state that masquerade themselves as middle of the road reporters that do not have a large political lean, do not have a large political bend. And because of that, they should be allowed entry into anything. And unfortunately, time and time again, we have seen from so many of these outlets, so many of these individuals, that that's just not true, that that's just not the case. These individuals are not honest brokers of truth. These individuals are not showing up to events to listen to what is said and accurately and honestly report what's going on. We've seen this. We know this is the case. The vast majority of the media landscape here in the state of North Carolina is incredibly biased and has a huge left-wing lean to it. That is an absolute fact. I will not debate that point. I will not argue that point. There is so much overwhelming evidence to back that up. Every TV station here in the state of North Carolina, the vast majority of papers, there are a handful of publications in the state of North Carolina that actually report what's going on. And we'll chat with one of the individuals that does that. AP Dillon from the North State Journal will join us coming up a little bit later on in the program to discuss what has been going on with media access here in North Carolina, because her entity is now at the center of some of this debate. And let me make sure I make this point clear, because I get accused of this all the time. Oh, Nick, you're a puppet. You're biased. You're absolutely correct. I am very biased. I have a very strong political lean. I'm not ashamed of that. I have make it abundantly clear, at least I try to do so on this program here each and every day, that I am a conservative, that I have strong conservative tendencies. I have strong Republican leans. This is not a secret. I don't shy away from that. I don't hide from that. I don't lie to people and say, no, you know what? I'm just a middle of the road guy. No, that's not true. I'm a tried and true conservative. I'm not ashamed of that. I don't have to run away from my political ideology, and I have made it an incredibly important part of my career. I'm not ashamed of it. I'm not afraid of it, but I'm honest about it. And what has frustrated me for such a long period of time is these individuals who have a left-wing political lean, have a left-wing political bias, which is fine, by the way, right? That's the point I'm trying to make. It's okay to be a liberal. It's okay to have a left-wing agenda or a left-wing view on things. I don't particularly care. We live in the United States of America. If you want to be a Democrat and have Democrat tendencies and have that kind of ideology, more power to you. I don't care. But I do care when you pretend that you are some middle-of-the-road individual. Your outlet covers things from a straight shooter right down the middle of the road when that's just not true. And this is one of the biggest differences that separates those on the political left from those on the political right. There are so many people that for whatever reason, I don't know why, are seemingly ashamed to admit where their political ideology stands. I mean, that's the only way that I can wrap my head around it, is that they are uncomfortable admitting that they have a pretty large and pretty significant political bias. I don't. I'm not ashamed of that. I'm not afraid of that. I have no problem sitting here and telling you I am a conservative. I analyze and look at situations and dig into details from a conservative lens. I have no problem saying that. But the vast majority of North Carolina media cannot and frankly will not do that. They show up to events pretending to be these nonpartisan media outlets. They rabble-rouse at said events. They get back from the event and they write a ridiculous, nonsensical story, completely missing the point of the event. Completely just missing the mark. How do I know that this has happened? Because I have been at events. I have covered events and done a good job of getting the quotes from the individuals that spoke and trying to cover that event in some sort of way in which the whole thing is encompassed. And I've tried to do that, and I think I've done a pretty good job at doing that. And then I'll read another story from the exact same event that I was at, and the story will omit large portions of the event. The story will ignore a lot of the discussion or a lot of the conversation. And that is a very common thread here in North Carolina. We have a relatively small media landscape here in the Tar Heel State. You've got a couple of big television stations, most of them in Raleigh and Charlotte. You've got WRAL and WTVD in Raleigh, the big stations there. You've in Charlotte, you've got WBTV, WSOC, Queen City News, a couple of the major outlets there. Only a handful of newspapers, really. The Charlotte Observer, the Raleigh News and Observer, the vast majority of other physical newspapers across the state of North Carolina really don't exist anymore. And then you've got some online publications that also have some print elements. The Carolina Journal, who I'm a contractor for, would be one of them. The North State Journal would be another as well. It's not like we've got a million different options here in North Carolina. I mean, on two hands, you can, and you'll have a couple fingers left if you're counting up. There's only really a handful of media outlets in the state of North Carolina that have this broader statewide audience. You have regional radio stations, regional newspapers, and things like that. And this is not to denigrate them or to poke fun at them at all, but they don't have necessarily that same statewide appeal. A lot of the coverage is regional or local. Yes, they will cover a state issue here or there, but if you asked somebody out in the western half of North Carolina what an Eastern North Carolina media publication was and what the name of it was, and vice versa, the vast majority of people aren't going to know because they're local or regional publications. But so outside of those, you only have those handful of outlets, the NNO, the Charlotte Observer, WRAL, WBTV, and a couple of other stations that really cover and have this broader statewide name ID and appeal to the citizens of North Carolina. And it is unfortunate to state that the vast majority of those outlets are incredibly biased in their reporting. And they have proven that time and time again. We're talking about media bias here in North Carolina. Recently, a couple of individuals, including Brian Anderson, from an outlet called The Assembly, was denied access to a Senate event, a private event, I'll note, that was held by Senate candidate Michael Whatley, the Republican, in the ever-important United States Senate race here in North Carolina. And as I just kind of mentioned there in the open, it's unfortunate that we've gotten to this point, but I come back to the word accountability. If you have proven time and time again that you cannot cover an event and you cannot look at something and show up and report on an event in an appropriate manner. And when I say appropriate, that means just cover the event. If you show up to a press conference, cover the press conference. If there's quotes from the individual who speaks, then that's what your reporting should be. That's what I would assume the vast majority of your story would be. If you have proven time and time again that you being in the room of an event is going to lead to an article or some sort of publication that is not encompassing the event, at a certain point, you shouldn't be surprised when you're denied entry. Let's be perfectly clear about this. You as a reporter or anybody as an individual, you're responsible for your actions. And if you have consistently proven that your actions are not going to be beneficial and really not do anything at all, then at a certain point, it makes sense that you would stop getting an invite. And it's been absolutely hilarious to watch this biased left-wing media here in North Carolina cry foul that they are no longer being invited and are being denied entry into events. And of course, they want to play the victim. They want to claim that they didn't do anything wrong. It's not their fault. I can't believe this is happening. Woe is me. I can't believe that this campaign. I can't believe that this candidate is not giving me access. How about a little bit of self-reflection? How about you just take a little bit of a glance in the mirror and say, why is this happening? Right? Just a little bit of inward reflection. Why is this situation unfolding the way that it is? And of course, the reaction that many on the political left jump to is that Michael Whatley and the Republicans are scared to have the media in the room. No, we're not scared to have the media in the room. But we know damn well that you show up to an event, you completely misconstrued the entirety of the event, you put up some hatchet job, Democrat, DNC paid for, left-wing biased report, and then swipe your hands and go, that's my reporting for the day. This is my job that I have produced on behalf of practically the North Carolina Democrat Party. So at a certain point, it should not be a surprise that you are no longer being invited to the room, that you are no longer being invited to take part in said conversation. You can't show up to something time and time again, lie about the event, completely misrepresent what has gone on, and then expect to be invited back. That's totally illogical. But that is exactly what has gone on here in North Carolina for decades. The media landscape in this state, and you guys have seen this consistently, will bash on Republicans constantly. We see this with the General Assembly all the time. And it makes sense. Republicans are currently holding the majority in the North Carolina General Assembly. So of course we're going to have to, pick fun at them. They're the group in charge, and I get that. That comes with the territory. But you see the ridiculous coverage that comes out of North Carolina media as it relates to the General Assembly. And how can I say that accurately? Because I spend hours during General Assembly sessions watching these meetings, taking notes, and when I cover it here on the Nick Craig Show, yes, I give my opinion. Yes, I give my stance. But more than anybody else in the state of North Carolina, I can accurately and honestly say I bring you more coverage of what has gone on in that chamber than anybody else. And it's not coverage of, well, this is what I think was said. No. When we've got a busy day in the General Assembly, as many of you have heard and watched and listened to, I'll play 30 minutes worth of clips. It's not because I'm lazy. It's not because I don't want to talk about it, but that's how you are informed. You don't need me to attempt to regurgitate what somebody said in Raleigh. You don't need me to try and do my best job of recollecting what was said. No, there's no reason for that. I've got an audio recording of it. I've got a video recording of it. It's a publicly available live stream. It's a publicly available video. So I don't need to tell you what a lawmaker said. I want you to hear what the lawmaker said. And I get that that's challenging for a lot of people. Why? These meetings happen in the middle of the day. Sometimes they're multiple hours long. And so it makes sense that not every single person, and the numbers would prove this, have the ability and have the time to sit through and watch an entire day in the North Carolina General Assembly. And so part of what I enjoy doing is doing that, pulling out some of the things that I think are important, and then letting you hear them, letting you listen to what is being said, let you listen to the debate that's taking place. Yes, I have an opinion. Yes, I have a political lean. It's not a surprise. It's not a shock. You can go and look at anything that I've published on social media over the last decade. It's blatantly obvious where I stand. When I meet people, what do I say? I say, I'm a conservative talk show host. There's no secret there. I don't tell people, oh, yes, I host a program in which I cover everything straight down the middle and interject no opinion at all and no bias at all. No, of course I don't say that. Why? Because that would be a lie. Because that would be an inaccurate statement. That would not be the truth. But if you ask, and I'm not going to name anybody in particular, but if you ask a couple of these individuals that you see covering North Carolina news, if you met them randomly out at a bar or restaurant and said, hey, what do you do? Oh, I write for X news publication, or I write for Y news publication. Oh, okay, that's pretty cool. How do you typically cover your stories? Not a single one of them will fess up to the fact that they cover those stories from a left-wing political bias. They won't. They will never cop to that, ever. And then they cry foul, they cry victim, they cry woe is me when they are finally called on that. And so I'm glad that Michael Whatley has stopped allowing these kind of media outlets into his events. And I know that there's some dissension on the Republican side about this. I'm all in favor of it. If you've proven that you are incapable of showing up to an event and registering a story on it that at least does a halfway decent job of covering what the event's about and not turning it into your own little clown show, chasing around Michael Whatley and asking him about players on the Carolina Hurricanes, if you've proven you're incapable of doing that, I don't think you should be in the room. I don't think it's worth having somebody like that covering an event, because they're not covering it accurately. There's no useful information that can be gleaned from that in any way, shape, or form. We'll talk about a recent event where Roy Cooper, the Democrat candidate here in North Carolina for U.S. Senate, is denying reporters access to his events. AP Dillon from the North State Journal joins me coming up here in just a couple of minutes. But before that, I want to tell you about the law group here in Wilmington. Thank Melissa Gott and her team for their continued support of the program, and remind you that when legal challenges arise, make sure you put your trust in the law group right here in Wilmington. Since 2003, their experienced attorneys have provided high quality, affordable legal services across Eastern North Carolina. Whether you're facing a divorce, navigating a real estate transaction, or maybe you're in a position where you need a strong defense, no matter the issue, the Law Group has your back. Their dedicated team ensures your questions are answered and issues are resolved as quickly as possible. Great news, folks. They're not some big national law firm. Melissa and her team live right here in southeastern North Carolina. Their office is located in downtown Wilmington. They're just a phone call away at 910-251-6088, or you can visit them online at lawgroupnc.com. That's 910-251-6088, or online at lawgroupnc.com. It's the Law Group. Experience and dedication you can rely on. We appreciate the Law Group and their continued financial support here of the Nick Craig Show. All right, quick break. AP Dillon from the North State Journal joins me coming up after this as the Nick Craig Show continues, streaming live this Tuesday morning, 7 a.m., YouTube, Rumble, X, Facebook, and available 24/7 wherever you get your podcasts. Continuing this discussion over media access here in North Carolina, it's my pleasure to welcome AP Dillon from the North State Journal to our airwaves here on the Nick Craig Show. AP, is always great to catch up with you. You had a little bit of a situation with one of your photojournalists over at a Roy Cooper event last week. Walk us through the latest, if you would.
Okay, so there were dueling campaign events in Gastonia, which is Michael Watley's hometown. He's the Republican candidate for U.S. Senate. So we sent our guy over to cover that one and get some information. And then we found out that Roy Cooper was holding one just a couple hours later, right down the road in Gastonia. So we sent our guy over to try to get some photos and maybe a couple sound bites so that we could include it in our reporting. He got into the venue and was subsequently ejected from the venue, telling him that he was not credentialed for the event. And that wouldn't necessarily be a big surprise to us because we haven't been receiving Roy Cooper's campaign media distribution invitations since the start of the campaign, despite asking for them several times.
What makes this so interesting is a lot of this controversy started back a couple of weeks ago when a North Carolina journalist by the name of Brian Anderson was not allowed entry into a Michael Watley event. Himself and a lot of the other left wing media here in North Carolina started, from my vantage point, AP kind of circling the wagon, calling foul on not being invited into events. As you know, you've been in this game a long time. This is pretty standard for conservatives. We've been boxed out of Democrat events, your outlet, and many others, including the group I work for, Carolina Journal, regularly was denied access to Roy Cooper events, 8 years in the governor's mansion. This is nothing new for us, is it?
No, not particularly new, no. Um, his office when he was governor was not particularly responsive to us. In fact, they used a app called Maestro Conference to monitor what media outlets were signing up for his COVID briefings. And in the beginning, prior to usage of that app, we got in a question, and then after that, it was 418 days until we got another question, and that was actually directed to Mandy Cohen, who was the secretary of DHHS at the time. So that was a problem. Getting any kind of records requests out of his office was a problem, and the agencies under him was also a problem. As I recently wrote, it took me over a year and a half to get emails from Roy Cooper when he was governor, and I've still only received year one. I haven't received the other years yet, so that's an ongoing process. Um, the the other outlets that were denied access to Watley events, including the assembly, that one took place over a week ago in Raleigh, and it was a secured building, and certain outlets were allowed up. Anderson was not. Um, he was obviously upset about that, as anyone would be. And the campaign didn't directly say why he was not allowed into that event, but I have a feeling it had to do with a previous event in Zebulon where he uh, asked some gotcha questions right off the bat that had nothing to do with the event that was being held. It was no tax on tips. And then he continued to press his question, following Watley around the room and out into the dining area outside of the private room where it was being held in a restaurant in Zebulon. And that it raised some eyebrows amongst those who were in the room. So I have a feeling maybe that was the reason. I don't know that that is exactly the reason. The campaign hasn't said. Um, and the other reporter who was denied access in, I believe it was in Haywood County. Uh, from what I understand from officials there, that reporter is barred from all Haywood County GOP events. It's something stemming to an assault charge or a citation or some kind of a lawsuit where that reporter had gotten aggressive with a county commissioner who happens to be one of the members of that GOP committee. And none of that has been reported in the news. It's just basically saying that they were denied access, but they're not saying potentially why that happened.
And AP, this is sparring the larger discussion and conversation over bias reporting in North Carolina, which is unfortunately something that us as conservatives on the political right are not new to. I mean, this is something that has been discussed in great detail. There's a big difference when you're talking about somebody that's in an elected position, like we're talking about with former Democrat Governor Roy Cooper, who spent 8 years in the governor's mansion, more than a decade before that as the attorney general, before that in the North Carolina General Assembly, more than 40 years of public service. When you transition this over to a political campaign, however, there's this big debate that's ongoing now whether these events should be open to everybody to attend, even individuals that unfortunately have proven that they are largely incapable of covering an event in any sort of fair manner. And as you just noted with some of the altercations in the past with the assembly and the reporter there and Brian Anderson, have absolutely, from my vantage point, no news value at all, arguing over whether you can name members of the Stanley Cup winners in the Carolina Hurricanes.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting to see. Campaigns can, as I've said before, campaigns can pretty much gatekeep who they want to keep in and who they want to keep out. But in a high-profile race like this, you have to wonder why these events aren't at this point. We're less than 100 days out now. Why aren't these events public events? The media should be, we shouldn't have to RSVP to come to these things. they should be covered just openly. And I happen to agree with that sentiment. Um, I don't see that happening on either side. I mean, no one's gonna give that kind of advantage to their opponent by being the first one to do it. If Roy Cooper does it, that's great. We'll come, we'll cover his events. But if we can't get in and we're not even on their press list, then that's an issue. And I've seen the press in the past take up for others who were, not allowed access to certain things, but I don't see anyone running out there yelling, "Hey, the North State Journal didn't get access to this. Why not?" I don't see that kind of defense happening.
And that's exactly the point. I think that's what has frustrated me so much in watching this process play out over the last couple of weeks. This woe is me from these left wing reporters that have had access to these events. And honestly, it's something new, AP. We really haven't seen in the past a Republican candidate, in this case, Senate candidate Michael Whatley, or really anybody else, deny access to some of these larger media entities here in North Carolina. It happened for the first time, and all of the conversation on Twitter and throughout social media would make you think that this is something that has never happened before. And as we've just been talking about, this was a common occurrence for many more right-leaning conservative media outlets here in North Carolina for quite some time. This is not new.
Oh yeah, and it was when he was an elected official, not necessarily a candidate. Roy Cooper would shout out in the North State Journal on a regular basis. But, a recent article by the News Observer last Friday didn't even link to our story. It didn't link to my X post, which went out several hours before they apparently filed their story. And then they didn't reach out to North State Journal. They didn't reach out to Blue Ridge Times that I'm aware of. And they didn't reach out to me either. Instead, they used a quote from me on a WBT show, Pete Callender show, where we were talking about this very thing about being shut out of Cooper briefings and communications. And I said, they used the quote from me that basically said that campaigns can do what they want, but they left all the context out. They didn't even link to the show. So, I mean, that's journalism 101. You reach out to the aggrieved party. And the excuse that, we filed our story before you did, that just didn't hold water with me because they updated their story as of noon on Friday, and our story had been out for almost 24 hours at that point.
Yeah, it's
So,
unfortunately it's just more indication of the insane
that was very
bias.
frustrating.
No, I'm sure it was as we watch this process play out, and it's as if these media outlets that again are being for the first time really ever questioned or called on some of their bias and their nonsensical reporting, finally having to deal with some actions for their consequences. And it seems like they want to throw a pity party, and that everybody in North Carolina should kind of surround them and cry with them while this is happening. When in large part, these are the decisions that they've made themselves that have put them in these positions.
Oh, that's true. And the way it's reported too. I mean, anyone who's reported on our outlets being removed from Cooper's event have, dug in and tied us to the GOP and, made it seem like we're GOP operatives. That's not the case. But yet when it goes to describe the other outlets that were removed from the Watley event, they're just news agencies. They don't say anything about their left-leaning, reporting style, or, that they're funded by, you know, donors and alleged dark money groups. North State Journal is a receipts-driven paper. We have been for a long time. And yes, our publisher at one point did work for Pat McCrory for about 6 months, but they continue to use that moniker like that's what we are. That's who we are. It's not what we are. I do. Folks should visit nsjonline.com and take a look at our reporting. We're not hiding anything.
Yeah, and I think that's the big difference is these left-wing media outlets in North Carolina, which it is fair to call them, consistently prop themselves up as this gold standard of news that everybody, in those newsrooms, everybody in those publications is interested in covering the story in a fair manner and an unbiased way. And for anybody that has any critical reading or logical skills, AP, it's blatantly obvious when you see the coverage of some of the things that come out of traditionally Republican and conservative either candidates, stories, or events. It is anything but that. They try and hide under this moniker of fair reporting and fair journalism, but their work very infrequently would back up those claims in any way, shape, or form.
Well, I mean, there's a difference in reporting. I mean, at NSJ, we put it out there, what they said, where they were, who was there, that kind of thing, and then we let the reader decide what's going on. But a lot of the other reporting that I've seen, they'll do that same thing, but at the end they wrap in all of these things at the bottom that actually have nothing to do with the topic at hand, but that paint a picture. They contextualize is what they say they're doing, or they're adding context. No, what they're doing is they're editorializing.
And there is a place for editorials. We see those in a lot of the major publications, the New York Times, the Wall Street Journals, and those are very clearly labeled editorials over at Carolina Journal and over at the North State Journal. There are opinion pieces that are very clearly labeled as opinion, not shying or hiding away from it. I think myself and many others, and I know you AP, are frustrated when you see these alleged news stories that exist, and the three quarters of the article is nothing more than opinion from somebody with very little news context at all.
That's correct. And, if I had submitted some of the pieces that I've seen recently, my editors would have laughed at me, chewed me out, and then told me to drop out like the last half of the article. So, I mean, it is what it is. Media these days, you know, if you can count more than a couple adjectives in any news story, then you're getting more opinion than you're getting actual news.
Yeah, no question about that. AP, thanks for the information today. Tell folks how they can stay up to date with you and all the work going on over at North State Journal.
Sure, you can visit us at nsjonline.com. We have an online presence there, but we're also a print publication that goes out once a week, and you can sign up on our website. We have a very great deal going on right now. And I also have a personal newsletter over on Substack called More to the Story.
You can also follow AP over on Twitter as well. A lot of great resources there for breaking news across the state of North Carolina. We appreciate the update today. AP Dillon joins us on the Nick Craig Show. Great insight there from AP. Always a great opportunity to catch up with her for those that were longtime followers of me. She was a frequent guest on the Wilmington Morning News Show I did here in Wilmington for a couple of years, covering what is going on across the state of North Carolina. As we wrap up this discussion over media bias and press access here in North Carolina, as you just heard there in my interview with AP, she referenced this News and Observer article that recently got published about, again, these left-wing reporters, these left-wing journalists being denied access. And of course, none of these outlets, the News and Observer, WRAL, none of these entities have ever covered groups like the North State Journal or Carolina Journal or others that have been consistently barred from events. See, it's good when a Democrat bars what they see as a right-leaning publication from their event. That's good. That's fair. That's how it needs to be. But the second that these individuals on the political left are barred, are not able to ask questions, are not able to gain entry, they lose their mind. Let's just read through just a little bit of this article. In a 10-day span, U.S. Senate candidate Michael Whatley blocked at least 3 reporters from covering his campaign events, labeling their news outlets as left-wing activists. An attorney for the North Carolina Press Association who represents McClatchy, which is the publisher and owner of the Raleigh News and Observer, the Charlotte Observer, called Whatley's decision frustrating, cowardly, and inconsistent with the marketplace of ideas. Oh, ain't that rich? Ain't that rich? Cowardly. Would you say that? I suspect this attorney in Mike Tajek would not say the same thing about Roy Cooper, as he frequently, while not he was a candidate, but while he was an elected official, the governor of the state of North Carolina, I don't think he would have used those words to describe how Roy Cooper handled media outlets that he didn't feel were friendly. I don't ever remember the News and Observer and any of their attorneys describing Roy Cooper as cowardly. I seem to have missed those stories. He did acknowledge, however, it is not illegal unless Whatley violates a requirement of a venue that should be open to the public. On Thursday, the campaign of Whatley's opponent, former Governor Roy Cooper, would follow suit and block a photographer from a 4th outlet from covering his event. Whatley of Gastonia goes on and on and on about that, and it says restricting press access. One event Whatley did notify news outlets took place on June the 3rd. when he gathered reporters at Smash Masters in Zebulon to talk about his support for President Donald Trump's no tax on tips, a piece of legislation that passed as part of the One Big Beautiful Bill Act last summer. At the event, a reporter from the Assembly, that's Brian Anderson, asked Whatley about a post on his campaign social media account dealing with the Carolina Hurricanes. Anderson asked Whatley if he could name 3 players. He couldn't. A month later, at an event on July the 10th, his campaign kept the Assembly and North Carolina Newsline from coming in, but allowed the News and Observer and ABC 11 to attend, along with conservative news outlet the North State Journal and Blue Ridge Times. This time, the Assembly and NC Newsline were not notified by the campaign about a news conference ahead of time, but learned about it anyway. The campaign told NC Newsline they wouldn't be allowed entry because they missed the campaign's deadline to RSVP. The Assembly reporter, in Brian Anderson, was turned away by building security and after arguing was told he would be trespassing if he stayed in the building and the police were being called. See, there's the entitled nature here. No, you're not allowed in this event. So you argue with the security because as a reporter, you are better than everybody else, and you're told if you stay here, you're going to be trespassed. Less than 10 days later, a reporter for the Asheville Citizen-Times found himself in a similar situation when he wasn't allowed into a publicly advertised event in a public building. Now, of course, what the News and Observer leaves out of this article is that reporter for the Asheville Citizen-Times, as you just heard from AP Dillon, had previously assaulted a member of the GOP in this area and was not allowed in the building because of that. So this is what is going on in the state of North Carolina. This is the frustrating nature of what's going on. This entire article, the vast majority of it, is about how Michael Whatley and the Republican Party is scared. They're cowardly. It's frustrating that people can't get access to their events. Yet every single one of these reporters had not a single word to say when outlets that have a different lean, outlets that cover things in a different manner, were frequently and consistently denied access not to private candidate events, but were denied access and denied the ability to ask questions under former Democrat governor. He was the governor at the time in Roy Cooper. They had nothing to say. And as AP Dillon noted in the conversation that we just had, it was more than 400 days during COVID, when everything was upside down, when the whole world was flipped upside down, businesses closed, schools closed, total pandemonium taking place. And it was her outlet and many others that waited more than 1 year before they were given the opportunity to ask King Roy Cooper and Mandy Cohen a question about COVID. Why was that the case? Because they weren't going to get quote unquote friendly questions, and so they denied access. They denied the ability for those outlets to ask questions. Don't remember seeing this kind of outrage when that was taking place. And of course, you didn't see said outrage. Why? Because it didn't exist. Because those in the establishment media here in North Carolina, those that pretend, that LARP, that play a situation, that they are these unbiased reporters, they don't care when conservatives get boxed out. They don't care when individuals don't have the ability to report on this from different sides, from different lenses, from different backgrounds. They don't care. As long as they get access, nobody else matters. And now that we've seen, and again, I have a little bit of a different opinion than AP Dillon on this. I think it's good that Michael Whatley, and I hope other Republicans start denying access to these left-wing hacks that pretend to be journalists. Now that it's happening to them, they want to cry foul. This has been going on with conservatives, with conservative media outlets, even more middle-of-the-road media outlets that just don't go full-on left-wing nonsense for decades now. This is not new. And so this sky is falling nature and all of these lengthy, multi-thousand-word articles about press access and how important is this that's taking place here in North Carolina. All of these articles, to me, they just fall on deaf ears. I don't care. You guys have proven you are totally incapable of covering a story in any sort of with any sort of attempt to cover that in a fair way. You have completely admonished any sort of ability to do that. Not because you were forced to do that, because that's how you decided to cover these stories, how you decided to cover these events. And now you want to cry foul. Now you want to create a pity party. Now you're looking for sympathy from everybody in North Carolina. Woe is me. The assembly was denied access to an event. Maybe it's because of your garbage crap reporting that you have put forward and attempted to spin as news. Maybe that's why this is taking place. This comes back to something I've talked about in great detail here on this program, and it is the total loss of any sort of personal accountability or responsibility for anything that is done. I have no shame in telling you I am a conservative. I am a Republican. I have that lean. I have that bias. I'm not ashamed of it. I'm not afraid of it. But I don't sit here and pretend that I'm something that I'm not. So for these left-wing media outlets here in North Carolina, if you want to be included and have access to these events, try and cover a story accurately. If you're incapable of doing so, then I hope the door gets slammed in your face because you provide no value to the citizens of North Carolina. You provide no value to your readers, to your audiences. I don't care. I'm not going to sit here and cry with you about not having access. To hell with that. I mean, it's absurd. Some of the garbage and nonsense and bullshit that these publications put out. You've got reporters running around during an event, chasing Michael Watley, asking him if he can name players on the Carolina Hurricanes. What news value exists in that? Tell me. Give me the rundown of the news value there. I mean, it's totally nuts. Totally insane. But again, this is what goes on. And you are supposed to feel sorry for them. You are supposed to feel that the Republicans are doing something wrong. And as I mentioned earlier, there's some debate. I've seen Republicans get all frustrated, say, oh, Michael Watley should allow these people into the event. Not a hell with that. Absolutely not. Proven no ability to cover this stuff in a fair manner in any way, shape, or form. So thanks to AP Dillon for joining me. Make sure you follow her work over on Substack over at the North State Journal. She's got a great X account as well for those that are those that use X pretty regularly. Her account over there is at APDILLON_ AP Dillon over there. Great stuff from her and the team over at North State Journal. Appreciate her time here on the Nick Craig Show. All right, that's going to do it for a Tuesday edition. Thanks to the Law Group here in Wilmington for their continued support. Visit them online, lawgroupnc.com, or give them a call, 910-251-6088. The Nick Craig Show streams live weekday mornings, 7 a.m., YouTube, Rumble, X, Facebook, is available 24/7 in your favorite podcast app, and is heard weeknights, 9 to 10 p.m. on WBT Radio in Charlotte. Enjoy the day. We'll do it again tomorrow morning right here on the Nick Craig Show.